Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 20th of July, 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Apologies for the brief technical problems that we've just had there. Everything is now back online. Well, we will be joined by live video Skype link today by David Ellis from Strategic Defence Initiatives. And we're going to have some in-depth analysis of what's happening in defence matters. And yeah, some very interesting points to raise there. Weather at the moment, still very hot, overcast in Plymouth, and people around the country saying that they've managed to survive those high temperatures. And of course, we just remind people that such is the power of control of local authorities now that no young children were allowed in the sunshine in Plymouth yesterday.
Indeed, between 1 o'clock, between 11 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they had to stay in over the lunch break because apparently it's too hot.
Too hot. So you need to listen out for those emergency broadcasts by your local authority, because they will now tell you if it is safe for your children to play outside. Not 1984, Britain 2016 under Theresa May. Well, the good news is that the BBC has installed its massive new propaganda machine in Plymouth, and this is reported in the local Plymouth Herald newspaper. We've even got royalty visiting, Camilla here, trying on some headphones for the first time. And apparently this is a multi-million-pound southwest headquarters to serve the region and the region's community with news. Let's have a look at the sort of things the paper's saying. It's multi-million-pound investment. It represents the largest building project and technical installation outside of London. So this is equivalent to London. It signifies our continuing commitment to regional and local broadcasting and to the communities we serve. This is the same BBC, of course, that pushes out the propaganda. I'm proud that BBC Southwest continues to offer the best in public service broadcasting. I'm proud of our programmes, our journalism, our ability to connect communities together in times of crisis and celebration. We'd just like to remind people this is the same BBC that boasts of a charity called BBC Media Action that actively states it's been helping to destabilise Syria and Kazakhstan, and it's the same BBC that's been encouraging Iranian women to break the law by not wearing the hijab. So a few million of a 3.65 billion budget, of course, represents absolutely nothing. But fascinating that the royal family's called in to help the propaganda machine along.
So Patrick has already been there to use the facility for RT, and said it was actually better than the studios.
Better than the studios in London. So maybe this is getting ready for trouble in London. Who knows what's going to happen? We've been receiving some very interesting reports suggesting that CCTV was going to be taken down in the Westminster area of London. We understand for refurbishment and a new company to take over the contracts. Whether that's going to be upgraded high definition CCTV installed with full facial recognition, we're not sure. But of course, the other possibility is there will be a CCTV outage, which would be very convenient were there to be any unfortunate terrorist incidents. So if anybody's got more information on that, we'd like to know. We don't anticipate that the BBC will be reporting.
So Trident is to be renewed. Theresa May saying, well, according to a few headlines suggesting that Theresa May saying she would kill hundreds of thousands of men, women and children with a nuclear bomb. Some people reporting that having been asked the question, is she personally prepared to authorize a nuclear strike that can kill 100,000 innocent men, women and children, that she responded with one word, which was yes. In fact, what she said was yes, and I have to say that to the honourable gentleman, the whole point of a deterrent is that our enemies need to know that we should be prepared to use it. We would be prepared to use it, unlike some suggestions that we could have a deterrent but not actually be willing to use it, which seem to come from the Labour Party front bench. Now, it's interesting that this is the first time, as I understand it, that any sitting MP has actually given such a statement. They've normally hedged their bets, or they've made no comment when asked that question. So this is the first time we've had an outright yes answer to this. So I wonder why that is. Is she feeling that as a woman she has to be making a more forceful statement than would otherwise be necessary, do you think?
It could be that, Mike, but I think there's an awful lot going on in the background because, of course, we got the whole process of the renewal of the nuclear deterrent. We've got moves to integrate British and American defence industry. That could hang together nicely around deterrent. I'm sure Dave Ellis will take us through a bit more of that in just a moment. But we've now got comments that Britain should be reinforcing NATO, spending more on defence, still working with the EU. There's a huge melting pot of issues around defence. So what is being played out here is not clear. And of course, one of the reasons for that is there is absolutely no proper debate in Westminster so that the public is informed on what these policies are. And we're going to have a glimpse of where the policies are coming from in a minute.
Yes, yesterday's debate was generally pretty poor. But anyway, here's Michael Fallon saying MPs on all sides have voted for by an overwhelming margin to renew our nuclear deterrent. We will now get on with building the next generation of nuclear submarines to help keep the nation and our allies safe for decades to come. So Dave, that comment from Fallon, first of all, who's going to get the contracts to build these nuclear submarines?
There's the key question, the question that was all totally absent from the Houses of Parliament. Yes, well, it's a Lockheed system, and predominantly Lockheed, predominantly Lockheed all round. There's a percentage of it that's BAE, but the lion's share is Lockheed, and this is the key point in terms of the money flows and the industrial flows and the policy flows here as to actually what's going on. And this is totally absent in Parliament. Not the main gate debate, which is what this was, they'd chosen to sort of redesignate it. So it's ironic that Theresa May has chosen to open up with her first statement in the House with this, and yes, she would press the button. So guys, everyone, get your factor 3 million suntan cream ready, never mind about Plymouth Council, worried about your kids going out in the sunshine. This is the direction we're going. So it was principally an open checkbook arrangement. There was no quantification to costs. So this is purely, this is over the term of the expected term of the Trident submarines, and the new generation of subs and the new generations of weapons, of course. It's been bantered around that this will be in excess of £200 billion sterling. So it'll probably be worse than that by the time we've converted it into dollars. It'll probably be more. The majority of the debate was hinged across Russia, but using them as a catalyst to sort of justify it. But really, what should have been debated in terms of we're going to spend a huge amount of money with Lockheed here and what actually that means. So the only things of substance that were worthy of note were, although Mr. Corbyn tried to talk about disarm, well, they have disarmed the boats considerably from their original envelope. So we've got eight missiles which are leased from Lockheed, and we've now got the company managing the production at Aldermaston is an American company. Although the Aldermaston facility is still British government, it's actually managed by an American company. So the only thing that was really of substance was Crispin Blunt had some interesting stuff to say on terms of detection and what would happen over that period of the system, and processing capability, algorithmic capability to then, see these things by wave analysis, and I expect that will be the case. Those things have already been initiated some 5 or 10 years ago, let alone the drone capability and all the rest of it. So, really, is this thing a redundant system? Possibly, considering the stakes that are involved if anybody actually wanted to use it. What would be the likelihood? So, it seems to me, in my opinion, that it seems to be okay to use nukes at sea. So that's sort of telling you really what the sort of risks are with this. If they pop a hatch and want to fire it in anger, and everybody's saying about them they're not detectable, well, let's ask one question. Do Lockheed know where they are? And if that's the case, will they be susceptible to hacking, or whether they're designated patrol zones? People can work this sort of stuff out. So that's that. So the new nuclear front on closed looping the industry here. So the new system will come in conjoined with new nukes. So new nukes require new piles in order to deliver the new fissile material to do it. So let's just sort of go back to Tony Benn, the energy minister, who took a long while to wake up and realise that nuclear power stations have nothing to do with producing electricity. Their sole function is to produce fissile material. They actually, over their cycle, consume electricity. So the new power stations that we're going to see, so, they're not power stations, they are processing plants for FISMAT, will be in conjunction with EDF and China, so French and Chinese. So, why are the Chinese involved with this? We're not going to be producing our own material like we used to do. That's going to be external. So then we see that Lockheed, on their recruitment site, are looking for nuclear engineers and training engineers to go into these power plants in order to close loop. So if anybody's saying to me about what are you talking about new nukes, I'm referring to a conversation I had with Lord Boris. And I was left under no illusion that new nukes were being produced and were going to have to be produced. And this now closed loops with having new power stations, but obviously they're not power stations, they're the piles that to produce FISMAT. So, we've got a whole contradictory thing here. I mean, the only bits of sort of useful stuff that came out on the flip side, one or two people were saying, well, what use was this what use were these things to us in Iraq or Libya? Lord Ramsbottom, ex-general, sort of was making some comments, well, we really need bigger conventional forces, not to be spending all this money on this. But everybody's come away from the closed looping of the money flows. And my understanding is that there's great risk here to BAE and British engineering because it's been choked to death over decades. Its order book is very small. It's vulnerable to a takeover and being junk bonded. I've had it put to me from several senior officers saying that there's money in the city now ready to take it over and junk bond it out via its pension fund and these sort of normal routes. Now, when you look at what the likely link up is, who's it going to link up with? It's going to link up with, as it stands, it's going to link up with Lockheed because that's the way the money is looping round. None of this is debated, of course, completely absent from all the, from all the important stuff that really people would want to be knowing about.
David, if I might just interject there, the simple picture that you are painting is of a very confused system. We've no longer got British MPs debating in Parliament how Britain should defend itself as a nation and what equipment we should have, what the size of our armed forces should be. And then, of course, the production of those forces and that equipment should be in the hands of British companies. All of that has gone out of the door. We've now got a mix of policy coming in, which is involving overseas nation states, such as the Chinese or the French, and then we're bringing in huge global corporations with immense power and influence across the globe. They're being brought in by the back door to run elements of this defence procurement process. So if you take a detached view, at the moment, it appears that nobody really knows how the British procurement system works anymore, who's in control of it, what the risks are. It's a shambles. I've maybe got a few clues as to where this policy has come from, but I'll just let you respond to that. Is this chaos, or is there something more subtle going on?
Well, it's certainly organised chaos because the MPs are not making policy. They're not doing what they should be doing. They're not looking at all the important stuff. They're off God knows where else. They're hogtied in the party policy framework because as soon as they got the chain of command, then they get the shut up because obviously somebody then that's interfacing with who's got control of policy is feeding it in externally. So it's a disaster. It is an utter disaster, and this is the one thing the general public have got to realise is that don't expect your MPs to be doing their job or trust them. Or, you just can't sort of give this stuff over because they're failing terribly across the whole spectrum.
Okay, David, if I may just come back in here, I've got some information which might start to explain what's going on. So we'll jump into the Daily Telegraph that came up with this headline. Very interesting one. Britain can still join the EU military missions after Brexit. And in the article, there is brief mention of policy exchange. We'll come on to them in a minute, but let's have a look at what the article said. In a nutshell, Britain should increase defence spending. We should block an EU army to protect Britain as a world power. We should be building a close relationship with Berlin in order to avoid undermining NATO as Germany and America move closer as military allies. And that UK should become more active in NATO post-Brexit. It also said that we should be spending over 2%. So just remember what's being stated there, all of those things which you're led to believe is official British defence policy. In the article, of course, we got Mr. Fallon. He says, of course, we won't be members of the EU, but we will certainly have a national interest in the success of those EU missions. And he goes on to say, I don't see the British interest in those missions diminishing. So we're Brexit, but we're not quite Brexit, Mike. That's the first thing to understand. So now let's look at what's going on. Well, bring in this organisation, Policy Exchange. This is actually the organisation making the statements, not the British government. So we're going to cozy up to Germany and NATO. We're going to oppose the EU army. We're also going to create a vision for the new EU. I found that interesting. We're leaving it, but apparently Britain is going to create the vision for the new EU. So I thought we'd ask, who are these people? Well, they're very powerful because they boast that they have been able to shape policy in Britain for the last 10 years. And we'll now say who voted for these people. Where did they come from? Well, we have to come back to Francis Maude, because in 2001, Francis Maude MP and Archie Norman set up a new project to transform Westminster. Now that, to me, Mike, seems to have a constitutional sound about it. Two MPs decide they're going to change our constitution. And they wanted to create a different kind of organisation. And where did that lead us to? Well, they set up Sea Change for the Conservative Party, and they also set up Policy Exchange. So the Daily Telegraph being totally disingenuous by presenting information as if it's coming from the government. No, it's coming from a think tank, but created by the Conservative Party in the first place. Does that help you at all, David, or does that confuse the situation still further?
Well, it certainly doesn't confuse me, but it would potentially confuse anybody that read it, because you've got clearly deliberately contradictory stuff in that article. But what you can see, if you're prepared to stand back and on your heels and look at it, is you've got a group here that have circumvented MPs' responsibilities and Parliament to have policy made by an external, unelected group. So what you've got here is that any notion of democracy, as Dr. Paul Craig Roberts says in Britain and America, he's quite right. It's dead. It's dead, dying. We're on the last gasping breath because the MPs are not making policy. Now, why are they in politics? Well, surely they got into politics to make policy and represent. But no, what do we find? We just find them implementing stuff that's generated from elsewhere.
Well, they're there for a good time, David. They're there for the drink in the Westminster bars. They're there for a little line of Coke in the toilets, has been reported, or they're watching pornography, or some of them are interfering with children. At the end of the day, they're puppets. So we have these arm's length organisations making political policy. And we have the press and the media simply lying to the British public, pretending that this stuff is coming out of a democratic process in Westminster. This is treason in front of our eyes. And if you want to check Policy Exchange, and I encourage people to go and look at their site yourself, one of the things you'll find is a list of people they're boasting they've had as speakers, which starts off with a gentleman who was head of the CIA. and it runs on from there. So we've got Spanish political figures who are apparently now advising Britain on how to run the country. I think I'm right in saying Spain's got a few economic problems, social problems themselves, but according to Policy Exchange, these are the very people to advise the British government. Something very dangerous. Is it better with Boris, perchance?
Good question. Poor old Boris. So Boris was meeting with John Kerry yesterday, and they held a press conference afterwards. They asked for some questions from the press, and certain media people from the United States decided to have a dig at Boris about some of his past comments, so he he said, "Thank you for giving me an opportunity." Well, after following, he got a hammering. Really, he said, "Thank you for giving me an opportunity to repeat a point I made earlier on. I'm afraid that there is such a rich thesaurus now of things that I have said that have been one way or another through what alchemy I do not know, somehow misconstrued, that it might take me too long to engage in a full global itinerary of apology to all concerned." So it's all just taken out of context.
Yeah,
apparently.
it seems a bit of a joke. I made a few mistakes. Yes. Let's move on.
Kerry, at the end of the press conference, tried to defend Boris. He said, "I've met everyone in the world like Boris Johnson or not. This man is a very smart and capable man." But before he continued with that, Boris stuck his oar on and he said to Kerry, "You can stop there." And Kerry replied, It's called diplomacy, Boris. It's called diplomacy. So let's see what Boris had to say. He went on to say, "We have some very serious issues before us today: an unfolding humanitarian crisis in Syria. We have real problems in Yemen, which are currently intractable, and we have a burgeoning crisis in Egypt."
Oh, right.
Did you know about that one?
I didn't know about that one. No, I certainly knew about Syria because I believe we created that quite successfully with the help of the BBC.
And Yemen we created via our mates in Saudi Arabia. But burgeoning crisis in Egypt. So here we go. Let's have a look at the burgeoning crisis in Egypt because the Egyptian Navy ships, and of course they're actually Turkish, are still missing apparently since the coup. So this is in the Independent yesterday. Or today, in fact, that some of the Turkish Navy, some of the commanders of that Navy, still a bit concerned that they might be arrested should they arrive back in a Turkish port.
They've disappeared with their ships.
Disappeared with their ships.
But Boris thinks this is connected to Egypt.
Indeed.
Right. Okay.
And what else is going on? Oh, well, this is quite interesting as well because this is obviously also Egypt, but in fact Turkey. So this is the two pilots that shot down the Russian jet. Have been arrested as in this purge that's going on in Turkey at the moment. It's the person who actually murdered the Russian pilot when he was landing on his parachute. He has also been arrested, but apparently these arrests were. This is quite an interesting development because these arrests were part of Russian conditions for normalizing relations between Turkey and Russia.
Right, that's pretty significant.
So Russia asked for an apology, which they got a couple of weeks ago. They asked for these two pilots to be arrested, and they also asked for the murderer to be arrested. Now, the one thing that they also asked for, which hasn't been done yet, is that they asked for the border to be closed between Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. Turkey and Syria and Turkey and Iraq, which hasn't been done yet. So we wait to see. But clearly, Turkey making moves to try to normalize relations with Russia.
Right. So we got major progress with normalizing a relationship between Turkey and Russia, where Turkey is clearly caving into Russian demands. We've got Mr. Fallon as Defence Secretary and Theresa May warning us of the huge threat we face from Russia. But we've got Boris Johnson a little bit confused as to which country is which.
Indeed.
Okay.
Now, he did mention Syria, but he didn't mention the fact that his mate, John Kerry, and his government was responsible for killing 85 people yesterday in Syria. Civilians, 8 families, apparently mistaken for ISIL fighters. Now, 85 civilians, that happens to be the same number of people that were allegedly killed in Nice. So is that a coincidence? I don't know. Are they passing some kind of message? Was this some kind of deliberate accident? Don't know. But I'm just wondering where all the moral outrage is for these 85 deaths.
Well, they're only Syrians, Mike, so I can't see that Theresa May or Boris Johnson's going to be very concerned about that. But I'm a bit confused because I think a little while ago there was boasting about the accuracy of, I think it was the Brimstone 2 missile, and apparently now Western Air Forces were armed with this sort of technology. They could hit a motorbike in a crowded street with no other collateral damage. So it appears that that is another complete pack of lies. But we're seeing this time and time again when the casualties are in Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan. We don't really care. Maybe Theresa May's explained that because she's quite happy to kill hundreds of thousands of innocent men, women and children.
Indeed. Well, we've been long warning that the so-called moderate opposition in Syria, and particularly in Aleppo, are in fact out and out terrorists. And if you needed any evidence of this, something that Boris Johnson didn't mention, hasn't made any statement on so far as I'm aware. This video clip, I strongly recommend people don't watch it because it is pretty harrowing. As it says in the headline here, harrowing clip captured US-backed Syrian militants beheading boy 11 for being a spy.
UK-backed.
Sorry, UK-backed Syrian. Yes, indeed. So this is the Nur al-Din al-Zenki group, and these guys are involved in the Syrian civil war. They are in eastern Aleppo, where all the so-called moderates are. They're part of the Syrian Revolutionary Command Council, and they are supported by the UK and the US. And in fact, they received US-made BGM-71 TOW anti-tank missiles from the United States in the past. So we're not arming terrorists at all, Brian.
No, just as David Cameron and William Hague didn't laugh and cackle that they were providing, I think it was $200 million to terrorists in Libya. So, yeah.
So the question was, is Boris going to make a good foreign secretary? Well, maybe we get a clue with who they've placed beneath him. So here we are, Alan Duncan, the Right Honourable Sir Alan Duncan, KPMG MP, Minister of State for Europe and the Americas. He has responsibility for the Americas, including Cuba, Europe, including all parts of the former Soviet Union, NATO and European security, defence and international security, the Falklands, the polar regions. He's responsible for migration, for protocol, for human resources, for the OSCE and the Council for Europe. He's also responsible for relations between the Foreign Office and Parliament. He's responsible for Foreign and Commonwealth Office finance, and he's responsible for Foreign and Commonwealth Office information and technology.
Well, this is obviously a highly capable man, Mike, who's capable of doing. Indeed, he is doing everything. So,
well, he's not because his colleague then, Minister of State for the Commonwealth and the UN, Baroness, the Right Honourable Baroness Annalise of St John's, DBE. She's Minister of State, as I say, for the Commonwealth and the UN. She's responsible for all foreign and Commonwealth business in the Lords. She's responsible for the Commonwealth as an institution, overseas territories, excluding the Falklands, because that's Alan Johnson's remit, SBAs and Gibraltar. She's responsible for the Caribbean, human rights, apparently. She's responsible for the United Nations, international organizations, peacekeeping, and the International Criminal Court. She's responsible for climate change. And I've always wondered who was responsible for climate change. But anyway, she's also responsible for international energy security policy.
Wow. Well, another tremendously capable woman. So we've got deities now, political deities, the power of gods in a man or a woman apparently running everything. I feel reassured, Mike.
David, is there anything left for Boris to do?
God knows, stand up and flick his hair. I mean, these people have portfolios that are just frankly breathtaking. It's just not possible to do that amount, to cover that amount of stuff. It's just bonkers. No.
Yeah.
Right. So we've got a chaotic situation with defence. We've now got to the subject of parliamentary responsibilities, which has led to the word bonkers. What we can actually start to see now is what the foreign financial ambassador, Austrian ambassador, said that basically Britain was to be reduced to Little Britain. And this is exactly what they meant. We are now witnessing the cartoon-style breakdown of UK. And of course, the little heads up of the closure of those CCTV cameras in Westminster has also been accompanied by the fact that we understand senior levels of the police in London are expecting major trouble on the street. So we've got chaos
during August.
We've got chaos politically. People have no idea what's in the country, different messages, and the undertone is this is moving us towards getting that violence on the street situation, where if we, the British public, allow that to happen, of course, in will come the Civil Contingencies Act. We will then see particularly reserve troops on the streets, and this will simply mirror the situation in France at the moment. So we're moving into very, very dangerous territory. And I really don't get any satisfaction in saying that, of course, the UK column has been warning that this was the route for several years now. But let's have a look at. Sorry, you happy there?
Yep.
Let's have a look at what the Telegraph says about Brexit. I nearly had my hand on the wrong button then, presumably the nuclear button. Well, you won't read the text, so we'll just bring it up on screen here. It says Article 50 gives any EU member the right to quit. There's no way to legally leave. There was no way to legally leave before the 2007 treaty was signed. The process cannot be stopped except by unanimous consent of the member states. Disregard body level 4. They keep creeping in. That's my fault. Any deal must be approved by a qualified majority of EU member states. So what the Telegraph, of course, doesn't mention is the European Communities Act, 1972, the real heart of the beast. And I find it interesting that if we signed something where there was no way to leave pre-2007, isn't that out-and-out treason, Mike?
Very well say that, absolutely.
Well, I think we'll stick with that. So somebody committed treason by trying to lock Britain into the control of a foreign power, namely the EU.
But it's all right. It's all right. Everything's fine because Theresa has said this. Theresa has said, I am determined that Britain will make a success of leaving the European Union. And that's why I've decided to visit Berlin and Paris so soon after taking office. So this is her visiting one of the other witches of Eastwick today, Angela Merkel. And she's on her way to Paris afterwards. Just bring that back up again, Theo, if you could. So she went on to say, I also want to deliver a very clear message about the importance we attach to our bilateral relationships with our European partners, not now, but also when we have left the European Union. So we're going to have really important bilateral relationships with our European partners. So that's good. But
can I just say, I notice she's in some form of tartan there in that picture. This is presumably the result of the little meeting with Ms.
Nippy.
Sturgeon, Nippy.
Could be.
Try on my little tartan jacket, Theresa.
But look, at the end of the day, what the point we've been trying to make all the way through this has been that the EU referendum has been a distraction. It's been a psychological operation. It's designed to distract because there's always been this common purpose agenda going on under the surface, which is taking us in a different direction. And here is a bit more evidence from it. This is the Chartered Institution of Public Finance and Accountancy. They're saying city leaders need to channel the spirit of Chamberlain. Now, this is not Neville Chamberlain. This is his father, Joseph Chamberlain, that they're wanting to channel. And he was a British politician and a statesman. He was described as being the first radical liberal at the time. This is at the turn of the 19th, 20th century, into the 1930s, 20th century. And he then became what was being described as a liberal unionist and serving as also what is described as a leading imperialist in coalition with the Conservatives when they were in government at the turn of the 20th century. So this article then says, this is a moment of great risk and opportunity for British cities. Post-EU referendum, post-Cameron and Osborne, the stakes have never been higher. Cities have patiently and persuasively made the case for rebalancing growth and power and for devolution to combined authorities with metro mayors. They also now face some big challenges on EU funding, trade, investment, universities, and the progress of their devolution deals, which we set out in Adieu, the impact of Brexit on British cities. But the underlying forces driving devolution to cities have never been stronger. So the underlying forces driving this devolution agenda have never been stronger. Just put that back a second, Theo, please. Thank you. We now have a new government, they say, and the outlines of a new approach to social and economic policy, all of which give big cities opportunity. Theresa May has said that she wants to plan to help all our cities and has signalled a willingness to look at a bond financing for major infrastructure projects. So we'll look at that a bit more in a second. So there are 4 priorities for cities collectively over the next few weeks, this article says. 1, restating the case that our main city regions are best placed to drive balanced growth. 2, showing that cities have big ideas about projects and can generate jobs and inclusive growth. 3, demonstrating that the city region structures that have been developed over the past few years have the capability and capacity to deliver both their existing strategies and major new projects, and so on. And at the heart of this is the replacement of democracy. We've already seen that in your discussion about policy exchange. This is all being driven in at every level of society, not just at top level government, but at the city level, at the regional level.
Yeah, so city-states, but of course London was designated to be a region, something more special than that. And of course that is why London has been specifically targeted by this callous use of migration in order to change the political spectrum. It's very clear what's going on.
So, but if you have a city-state or a unitary authority, a regional assembly, you need to finance it somehow. And of course, central government isn't financing these city-states as they would like at the moment. And of course, this is deliberate policy. So here we have the Financial Times reporting the multi-billion-pound municipal bond market. So this is how they intend to finance this new structure of government. As nations issue bonds and raise money on the markets, through the bond markets, they're now wanting to develop a municipal bond market. This already exists in some parts of the world, but they want British cities to absolutely get involved in this. And the previous article was hinting at that. This Financial Times article confirms that absolutely a key part of the infrastructure for city-states.
Forget this right in my mind. What we're talking about is encouraging lower levels of government to get involved in the money, directly involved in the money market.
Absolutely.
Right, and yet we've had a few years ago local authorities investing in overseas banks where they thought they could get a higher interest rate, and they then lost.
But this is a slightly different thing, because this is about the cities raising money, so they issue their own bonds instead of a national government issuing bonds.
So mini City of London cities
issuing their own bonds in order to raise their own finance.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, financial news then. Also sticking with the Financial Times, because this is PIMCO. Now, PIMCO is one of these companies that perhaps many people haven't heard of. It is the Pacific Investment Management Company, $2 trillion or so in funds under management, and they they buy government bonds. And maybe perhaps in the future they'll be buying city bonds. But this company is described as a thought leader in financial markets. This is the type of company that if a government has a policy which they feel would affect the value of bonds, then PIMCO would be the type of company that has the power to come along to the government and say, sort out your policy or we're going to bankrupt you. This is the level of organization that PIMCO is. They have stolen the Manny Roman, who was the chief executive of Man Group, because they are obviously suffering at the moment with the current situation regarding interest rates and bonds and so on. They've taken him from Man Group, another huge hedge fund, and so we watch with interest what the impacts of that will be. But I just really wanted to highlight this story in order to highlight PIMCO, because I'm sure many people aren't aware of them. Then this is quite an interesting little story, because bank bail-ins have been a topic of discussion over the last period of time. And this is the European Court of Justice basically saying that they believe that the bank bail-in policy is a legal policy. So this was challenged in the European Court of Justice. Many people surprised that the ECJ decided to uphold this as a legal policy. But they also say that, of course, that there's no real requirement for genuine investors, savings accounts to be hammered. But that remains.
Okay. Well, David, perhaps we should give you right for a little bit of comment on any or all of that.
Well, you've got a bit of a new game creeping in here, haven't you? The government stock thing has gone badly wrong. Government gilts and the ability for governments to borrow money and leverage money, which they've obviously got to the point where they can't go any further. So this is a new idea, new concept. Let's keep the money flowing, imaginary money, via stocks from cities or conglomerate unitary authorities. So once you get to that degree, what we're now taking is the further step democratically. And those that will issue and control the money will care not for the politicians or the lawmakers, and that's essentially where the variance is with this. So we've then got the interface problem of the people then that control the policy care not for the MPs. So this is where we are. This is where we are now, and this ever creeping thing of cities is, I think, is just a ploy, because we financially, globally, well, 3/4 of the globe have leveraged money and quantitative ease to such a degree where the game is now up and they cannot continue.
Yeah.
Well, they can continue. You can continue if you've got perhaps, say, operational aircraft carriers, but other than that, that's the only way of underwriting it.
David, well, I certainly agree with the fact that what we're seeing is the control of the money men get even closer and tighter to the political power. So this is really quite major events unfolding now. I'll just end on the note that if anybody doubted what we were talking about with policy exchange, just have a look at this is part of their accounts. And of course, they're an educational charity, deeply involved in politics, but an educational charity. They're there for the non-partisan advancement of education in the economic, social and political sciences and their effect on public policy. So that's what they say. And I'll just bring it over the top here. I know this is a little bit small. I'll read part of it. These are some of the people they're boasting of working with the Policy Exchange. General David Petraeus, former director of the Central Intelligence Agency. General Martin Dempsey, chairman of the US Joint Chiefs of Staff. Ideal person to advise us on British policy, I think. Jose Maria Aznar, former Prime Minister of Spain, former Prime Minister of Australia. Jonathan Powell, former Chief of Staff to Tony Blair. So these are really quality people. And do we really need policy exchange, and should it be allowed to continue what it's doing? Personally, I don't think so.
No.
Okay, well, as a last comment from me, my comments yesterday about Nigel Farage, not surprisingly, created some feedback. And I will just say I'm very happy to continue to state that it's a remarkable coincidence that just as the country needs leadership, we've come out of, we've got the Brexit vote, but of course we haven't come out of the EU in any sense. Mr. Farage has decided to bail out himself and take a holiday, I understand. Meanwhile, we've got these very, very serious events unfolding in UK for which there is absolutely no leadership for the 4 million people who voted UKIP at the election. And of course, we've now got another 17 million people who said we need to get out pretty quickly, who are also looking for leadership. So I think we're now at the critical path where we can see events unfolding very quickly in UK. We're heading to complete chaos and breakdown if we let it happen. And we need people to be getting out there and educating and informing those 17 million Leave voters and the 4 million UKIP supporters. Who's going to do that? We think it's going to be all of us because it's quite clear our political leaders have bailed out. So thank you for joining us today. We're going to say a big thank you to Theo, who was running the studio for us today. So
yes, first time on his own, and
first time solo.
I just want to make clear the technical problems today were my fault.
Okay, thank you for that, Mike. So well done, Theo. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.